Covering the stories that impact your life, your town, your state, and your future. This is the Means Report with your host, Brad Means.
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Means Report. We certainly appreciate you spending part of your day with us, where today we're going to take a look at a subject that always generates a lot of interest. You know, we cover a lot of issues here on the Means Report. We interview a lot of people, but when we talk about crime or anything that has to do with law enforcement, the legal system, criminals, it gets a lot of response. And so we're going to do that today. And a lot of the issues surround why people do bad things. And the way to figure that out is to get inside the mind of a criminal. And there are imaging systems that try to do that. Think MRIs, think PET scans that look at people's brains and try to figure out why they commit crimes. Is that useful? Is that something that we could depend on in a trial? We'll talk about it. Speaking of trials, how about neurolaw? It is really making headlines lately, and it has to do with trying to use the discoveries of neuroscience and try to apply them in a legal setting. We'll talk about how useful neurolaw is and if it's something that could continue to make headway in the future. And internet-based data, what does that mean? That means what if somebody posts something that is somewhat sketchy and then later they become the next mass shooter? Should we have seen those red flags in those social media posts? We can't think of a better person to tackle all of those difficult subjects with than MCG forensic psychologist Dr. Michael Vitac, a Means Report veteran. Dr. Vitac, thanks as always for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's take a look at this imaging that I talked about. That was the first bullet point we saw on our screen.
Yes, sir.
Is it possible to take a photograph of someone's brain and see if they are going to be a criminal or to see what made them commit a crime?
Yeah, that's a really emerging topic within the idea of neuroscience.
Yeah.
And what has been going on is that some of these applications have been used in exactly that manner. The problem with this is that many of them are being used incorrectly, and people are using images to make these sort of assertions you just spoke about, like, hey, this helps us understand this, or this leads to this, when in fact the science is not quite there yet. So a lot of these topics are actually, and these technologies are being misused. And that's where, as a scientist and a forensic psychologist, we want to kind of put the brakes on some of these things and make sure we're using it appropriately and correctly in scientifically backed manners.
For people who support this, do they look for plaque or irregularities in the human brain and say, there you see, criminal? That's
exactly what they do. They look for primarily irregularities or different things. The problem with that is those irregularities are present in many people. Including many people who never commit a crime. And because of that, just because an individual has a specific or atypical brain issue, it ultimately tells you very, very little. And it tells you almost nothing about their motive or different things like that, which, when we get to the why, is one of the most critical things we can think of.
Is it still too early in this, or are we already seeing things like this be admissible in court? A PET scan image, an MRI image, where the judge is accepting it into evidence.
Well, that's exactly a huge point. It's being accepted often without the judge or the trier of fact giving it appropriate vetting. So often it's being admitted, and sometimes it's being admitted wrongly.
So is it fair to say that what we've been talking about so far falls under this neurolaw umbrella?
Yeah, neurolaw is exactly kind of the name for it. It's a subtype of neuroscience, where neuroscience is being specifically applied to legal issues. And so neurolaw, and there's centers all over the country. So they're trying to make strides in this way, but unfortunately, in many applications, it is being misused.
It seems like there would be a substantial amount of money to be made in this field.
There is absolutely a substantial amount of money, and there's also backing from donors who want to get their scans or their particular equipment into this area, because in civil lawsuits or various things, it can become quite lucrative. And I think that's fine. I'm not speaking anything directly against that, but we need to make sure that we have the appropriate scientific backing before we engage in these types of leaps when we talk about what the brain images show and what they actually mean regarding human behavior.
What will it take to get there? More trials, years and years of research?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
We need to have years and years of research. We need to have strongly regulated scientific studies. like anything, and we need to then show in replication, where we kind of repeat what's been done, that these studies are actually showing us what they are.
We've talked before about the insanity defense, and
Yes.
so I want to talk about that. And regardless of what an imaging machine shows, how you could determine if someone is insane. What's the definition of insanity?
Right. So insanity is the kind of colloquial definition is where you have a mental illness, a serious and severe mental illness, and because of that illness, you don't understand right from wrong at the time.
Okay.
So that's kind of what all states tend to use.
The mental illness component has to be present.
Has to be present first, and then that it leads to someone not understanding right from wrong.
Okay, so you can't have one without the other. In other words, every child under the age of 3 is not insane.
No.
They don't know right or wrong.
But they don't know right from wrong.
But you have to have the mental illness there.
Right.
All right, so how do you go about concluding that before you're called as an expert witness to say, look, my recommendation
Right.
is that you consider this person insane?
Well, and it happens very rarely, but what we try to do is look at total evidence that's available. And it really also kind of gets into motives. We want to know if someone is mentally ill, why did they do what they did? For example, someone can have a mental illness, get angry at someone, and act out. And that's not insane. That's just someone who's angry. Versus someone who has a mental illness, maybe thinks someone is after them, and because of that mental illness, and then acts against that. And that's more of a prototypical, a regular definition of what insanity looks like.
So when you get involved in those forensic psychological interviews take place in your office or in the jail cell, are you looking for someone are you looking to determine if someone has been insane their entire lives, or if they're just insane at the time of the offense?
Well, it only matters really at the time of the offense.
That's all you're concerned about. That's all they want you to look at.
Yes.
And you said more times than not, you don't recommend insanity.
By far, by probably 90% of the time, we don't recommend insanity.
Why? Most people aren't insane?
Most people are not insane. Most people, when they do something, even if it's not understandable, even if it's heinous, even if we can't understand it, they still understood that what they were doing was against the law and against the morals of society.
How quickly can you tell if someone is trying to dupe you, and what do you look for?
Well, you look for patterns of behavior over the course of time. So if there is a history of such things, it's very evident. It's very hard to have a long-standing mental illness and it never shows up anywhere.
Right.
There's almost some kind of evidence that is apparent.
Determining if someone can tell right from wrong seems like a huge, daunting task.
It can be.
Even if the mental illness is there. So let's say you've got that part checked off, and now you're going to the do you know right from wrong part. Other than them telling you that they don't know right from wrong, how do you determine that? A bunch of questions?
A bunch of questions, and then often what we do, I mean, many more times than not, is we talk to people who saw the crime, and nowadays we often get just a ton of video evidence. It's almost hard to walk anywhere or go anywhere now where there's not video evidence of where you are, cell phone evidence, and just a variety of things. And we take all that together and sort of disentangle it to try to get as close of a picture as possible as this person's behavior and then the ultimate motives for such a behavior.
Is it possible in the course of this brief interview together for you to kind of show me what it looks like and say, look, here's one time when I determined that this person was insane because they said this to me, or there was a moment in the interview when I thought, okay, this is officially an insane person?
Yeah, there's never one moment. It's usually a several moments kind of put together.
Yeah.
So, and often, like, we're going to talk to people around them. So how are they acting the day it happened? How they were acting before that happened? Were they calm? Were they agitated? And you collect all this data, and that really helps inform our opinions of someone's actual mental state at the time of the offense.
We talked earlier about these images that neurolaw outlets are using,
Right.
and they're becoming more and more popular. I know you're among the naysayers. But does a criminal's brain look different in some cases than others? I've heard that pedophiles might have tumors,
Sure.
and that's a way to know that they are a pedophile or might become one. Does the criminal brain sometimes actually look different?
So we actually just published a paper in neuroethics on this topic of insanity defense and neural law. And there has been some evidence where, for example, there was a case where a teacher started having sexual urges towards a child, and through the course of a bunch of evaluations, they actually found a tumor pressing on it, and when that was removed, he kind of went back to not having these urges. What's really important to note about that is that even while this tumor was present, he was taking major steps to hide his behavior, to conceal inappropriate actions, to avoid his wife, and to hide some of these thoughts he was having. Well, someone is going through such pains to hide their behavior that they know is illegal, that really suggests that they, despite the fact that they were having a hard time stopping themselves, that they understood what they were doing was wrong. So even the fact that that tumor was present still did not indicate that they did not understand the difference between right and wrong.
Sure, that behavior might have been there anyway.
It could have been, but the mere fact that they were taking such steps to hide it and going through very elaborate processes was very informative, and even as we talked about this specific case, provided real thorough evidence, despite the fact that there was a brain issue, that individual still understood right from wrong. And that's one of the primary limitations of neuro law, is it doesn't really get at that motives and that ability to sort of get at the ultimate behavior that speaks to the issue.
When we come back, we're going to talk about some cases that have been in the news lately and why certain criminals may have behaved the way they did, as we continue our discussion with forensic psychologist Dr. Michael Vitac on the Means Report. Welcome back to the Means Report. We appreciate you staying with us as we continue to go into the mind of a criminal, delve deeply into the mind of a criminal. We covered insanity and what it takes to make that determination in our first segment, and what good are brain images when it comes to looking at the mind of a criminal. Dr. Michael Vitac, forensic psychologist from Augusta University, still with us. Sometimes when you're watching those CSI type shows on TV, you'll see a criminal being interviewed, interrogated.
Right.
And you'll see on the screen an image of their brain, and the interviewer is trying to see how those brain waves react or respond to certain images or questions. Is that realistic?
It's somewhat realistic,
Yeah.
but the behavior that can be gleaned from that and the overall insights of that behavior based on those brain waves is still very, very limited. So some of these brain imaging tools have also now been used as lie detectors, as things, and again, different areas of your brain will activate. But even that, some of that information has been called into serious question.
Are you a lie detector fan?
We don't use it in our practice,
Yeah.
no. But even so, in fact, it's often not even admissible in criminal trials. Again, those are things where we have to really improve our science before we start relying on such information, especially when we're talking about someone's freedom. These are high stakes sometimes.
I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, especially Marlena Wilson, our executive producer and director, who loves CSI type shows. But I bet you sit there and shake your head a lot and say, that's not really how it works.
Well, but that happens all the time.
It does.
And especially too, where we see all these, things being happen within a very small period of time. We have evidence, convictions, trials, and it's all done in 45 minutes plus commercials. That's just not how life works. Often these things go on for years.
What's the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath?
I think that's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Is that sociopath is an older term. It really means someone who is antisocial and sort of lacks the ability and doesn't truly care. They lack emotions,
Okay.
especially regarding other people.
Is that a form of mental illness?
No, not by a legal definition.
Or not by a legal definition?
Right. Being a psychopath does not excuse you for criminal behavior.
We've seen a couple of cases in the news recently. We saw just this past week, before the recording of this Means Report, a tragic case out of South Carolina, a 6-year-old girl whose body was found. A man's body was found next to her, a 30-year-old man. The presumption is that he killed her and then killed himself.
That's right.
Take me through the killing yourself part of things. What would be the benefit or goal of a criminal? And we're not convicting him, we're just using this as an example because the case it's in its early stages, of committing a heinous act against a child and then killing yourself, never to be able to do that again. What's that mindset, and might that person have been determined insane one day?
Yeah. So let me caveat this.
Yeah.
I only know this from the news. I've not interviewed anyone, so these are very speculative answers.
Absolutely. And my question too, I think I just told you all I know about it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know this particular case or what motivated him. I mean, it's possible he felt tremendous guilt and he did it. It's also possible he didn't want to get caught and realized that his life was practically over anyway. I mean, there's again several motives that could have come from that behavior. And it would take a much deeper dive into his psychology and where his head was at, which could be done if it was needed. But I think safe to say there were some significant problems with that individual.
We saw Dylan Roof in the headlines a few years ago out of Charleston, the mass shooting at a church in Charleston, South Carolina, killed 9 people.
That's right.
He had some disturbing social media posts.
He did.
And so that brings me to my next topic, which is, can social media posts be red flags? And how would you know when they cross the line between just an angry person and a criminal?
Well, more and more nowadays in my field and across the board is we're getting social media posts, instant messages as part of our discovery packet. When you consider over 70% of Americans engage in some form of social media use, I certainly do. I assume you might have a Facebook page. Sure.
Yeah.
That information can become very useful for law enforcement, for forensic mental health practitioners in sort of trying to help understand people. But certainly if someone is ranting and raving on social media, posting inappropriate things, nowadays law enforcement can be informed. We see it especially too in something called threat assessment, and that's a specific threat against a specific person, politicians often. And the Secret Service and other people very much rely on social media posts to provide them insights into who might be a danger.
Do they look for keywords or things like that? Because there are so many people out there posting. How do you narrow it down? Well,
you don't narrow it down. What you have to hope is that someone helps you with that. You get a call from a concerned friend, a concerned relative that says, hey, my friend is posting some really sort of difficult stuff on social media. I think this should be looked at.
Yeah.
And that's how often law enforcement can get involved with that.
What about serving as a way to stop crimes before they happen?
Absolutely.
Are you seeing that happen ever?
I
know a lot of your stuff is after the fact.
My stuff is almost always after the fact.
Yeah.
But we are seeing that more. We're seeing people who make disturbing posts or critical posts or posts that might be viewed as threatening, and people calling the police. And the police often just stop by and get an eyes-on look of the individual and say, what's going on today? You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. And then they show them the post, and sometimes they may even acknowledge, yeah, I had some plans or I didn't. And we see it too in schools. And we hear about people calling in information and the police being able to respond and being proactive in those things. And that's critical.
In most of the cases that you work, in most of those cases, do you interview the suspect or the defendant themselves, or can your work be done just through that case file?
In almost all our cases, we interview the defendant.
Okay.
Now, if the defendant doesn't want to speak to us or there's some other reasons, we may not. But we always give the defendant an opportunity. We want to meet with them. We want to take a look at them. We want to evaluate them, generally face-to-face. There are times where that isn't necessary, but usually that's what we do.
Is there a common thread that runs through most of the defendants you interview?
No.
No, really?
No. I once had a supervisor many years, and this has stuck with me for about 20 years, and he says, Mike, forensic cases are always kind of like snowflakes. They all look the same, but when you look at them very closely, they each kind of have a different flavor. And I have found to be, in my 20 years of experience, that to be very true. That even on the outside, they might look the same. When you really look closely at them, there's some very subtle and sometimes nuanced differences that are very critical.
What about from a societal standpoint, what we can do to make these bad things not happen or make people not turn evil? Do you ever spot anything in your interviews where you walk away saying, wow, if someone had intervened here, this person wouldn't be across the jail cell from me?
Yeah, what's interesting, I've spoken on this before to various groups, but I think if I could choose one thing, and only one thing, if we started with child abuse, if we started of not being as and I'm not talking about not disciplining your child, I'm talking about the abuse, because
are a lot of these people abused?
Many of folks who engage in violent crimes have a history of abuse.
Yeah.
It's a marker for abuse.
So tell me what you're talking about. You're talking about spanking, whipping?
No, I'm talking about just significant and severe and persistent abuse and neglect throughout the homes. And we're seeing more and more of these cases throughout the country. cases where families are doing really horrific things to kids. And my thinking is, this is the tip of the iceberg. That the fact that we're just finding out about it means there's probably more about it than we even want to imagine. There's a recent case out of Iowa where a family was arrested for starving their child. We had a high-profile case out of Atlanta where the mother did that to her daughter. So what we're seeing is the sort of persistent physical and sexual abuse of children does often not lead to great outcomes.
Well, my next question was going to be, do you see any hope for the future as far as making any progress, any headway in making our society nicer and less crime prone? But I think you just answered it, because it sounds hopeless. You can't go knock on every door and see how a parent's treating their child.
We can't. And in fact, there's a recent case in Georgia where two adolescents were killed. It's going to be a tough trial, but it also involved family members. And they were very good at hiding their abuse from the rest of the world. Best we can do is be vigilant. If we truly suspect something, to make phone calls and to call the authorities. And even if we're wrong, that's okay.
Someone once told me, and if it was you, forgive me, that school shootings are the new normal, and that every time we talk about one on this broadcast, the point was there's going to be another one. Are we going to see these?
We did talk about that.
Yeah. So to follow up on that, based on what you've just said, if we're seeing all of these future criminals, perhaps, who are in the child abuse stage right now, and they're going to come out of that house one day and go nuts, forgive me, does it say to you that this problem is only going to get worse, and that there's really not much of a dent we can put in it?
I don't know. I think that those are fair questions. I think we as a society need to do more. But ultimately, like I've always talked about school shootings, is there's going to be another one, but that doesn't mean that our schools aren't safe, right? So it's still a small portion of people. Same thing here. But as much as we can get rid of that at an early age, as much as we can eliminate and minimize abuse, we're doing everyone in society a favor.
Yeah, but you're right. Bottom line, it's up to the rest of us to spot it.
That's right.
Those parents aren't going to do it.
No.
Michael Vitac, our 30 minutes has flown by. Wow. Thank you for being here. Please come back soon.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. A fascinating topic, looking into the mind of a criminal, why they do what they do.